Okay. Hi guys. Please write down to the chat that you can hear us well and can see us well. And we are starting. My name is George, and you are watching Orange Frontend Day Meetup from Devexperts company. And let me introduce my colleagues today. We have George. He's a front-end developer and one of our speakers. We have Alex, who is our front-end team lead and also the second speaker. And we have Dmitry here, who is the head of front-end department and also is my co-host today. And we will hold this dxTechTalk today all together. We're starting next couple minutes, and while we're waiting for everyone to join this chat and video, Dmitry, could you please introduce Devexperts company?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Dmitry. I'm the head of front-end department. A brief story about Devexperts. As a company, we've started to building complex software for capital markets 20 years ago. And currently, we have a lot of interesting high-load solutions for such things as multi-asset trading, which is like stocks, trading, bonds, futures, options, and a lot of other complex things. We have our charting solutions, we have our wealth management solutions, and we also build an exchange from ground up. So that's basically brief information about the Devexperts.
Thank you. We started holding the dxTechTalk meetups 4 years ago and organized a bunch of events in Portugal and Bulgaria. And unfortunately, pandemic situation didn't allow us to make it in our own pace. But now, finally, we have an opportunity to return back on track. And today we are holding our front-end meetup online, but our next events, they will be offline in Sofia, in Porto, in Istanbul. And I just shared the link to our meetup.com group. So it's in the chat, in the YouTube chat. Please join us and we will be happy to see you there offline. And you will find all detailed information about these events by this link. And please don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel so you won't miss useful and interesting materials that we prepare. Thank you in advance. And let's return back to our today's meetup. Dmitry, what will it be about?
Of course, first of all, it will be about front-end. And we are a React company, so we will talk about React front-end. As we have a high-load platforms with a lot of live streaming data, there are a lot of challenges for front-end engineers in our team. Basically, it's about optimization of complex stuff. So first of all, George will share his experience of boosting interface speed with the help of uncontrolled components in React. And he will show how accelerated charts will look like. And the second topic, the second presenter will be Alex, and he will be telling us about migrating data using a web browser, and of course, we'll share some best practices, secret tips and tricks of the Devexperts engineering team. Please feel free to ask your questions in the YouTube chat during the whole presentation, and we will ask our speakers to answer them right after their speeches.
Great. Can't wait to finally see the presentations. George, are you ready?
Hi.
Please start. Yeah, we can hear you well.
Nice. Now I hope YouTube can see my screen. So, good day everyone. My name is George, and I work as a software developer at Devexperts in the dxCharts team. Our team is creating a library for charting, and for us, it's very important that our library can produce 60 frames per second in all cases. Just imagine you work with some tool and there are delays in the wrong places. It totally ruins the illusion that the tool you work with is an extension of your mind. So for us, it's very important to keep our performance at appropriate level. Today, I'd like to tell you about one of the performance problems we faced during the development, and I will show to you how we solved it using uncontrolled components. I'd like to be quick, so you won't get bored. Firstly, let's figure out what React control components are. There is very little information about controlled or uncontrolled components in official documentation. But actually, there is nothing special about them. It's ordinary React components, and by default, everywhere in documentation, control components are implied. This statement on the screen is taken from React official documentation article, which compares controlled and uncontrolled components. And the wording, in most cases we recommend using control components, leaves the following question open. When can we use uncontrolled components? And okay, let's have a deep look into controlled components. As I said earlier, it's very common React components, and if you are a React developer, you definitely use them. The greatest thing in React is that you don't have to think how you should update the DOM when your component state is changed. React does all the work for you. And because of that, it's very convenient to use them. Let's imagine that we have a following task. We want to show hello world string on the screen when user clicks in any place inside the document. And of course, we implement the solution using React. And an important point of this task is to avoid React render. I know it might look absurd, but actually it helps us understand what React uncontrolled components are. So this task can be solved with uncontrolled components. And before we start walking through the code, I'd like to note that it was simplified intentionally. That is, in a good way, we have to do two more things here. The first is to add an array of dependencies to use effect hook. And the second is to return an unsubscription callback. So let's walk through the code. On the second line, we are creating React ref, which we assign to the div tag in the 8th line. So we can access the DOM node later inside the effect, which we declared on the 3rd line. In the effect, we are creating React a click event listener and attaching it to the document body. In 5th line, we access the DOM node directly and output hello world string on the screen. Because we didn't update any React state, we have managed to avoid React render. And so this is how uncontrolled components actually work. Unfortunately, examples in official documentation don't show advantages of uncontrolled components at all. And that's why they're used very, very rarely. And besides that, uncontrolled components always assumes direct interaction with the DOM. And because of that, they are more difficult to use comparing to controlled components. And it might look like we are turned back to the origin. I mean, direct interaction with the DOM and stuff like that without any libraries. So why do we need uncontrolled components if we don't see any advantages? To understand why we need them, let's take a look at the example. On the screen, you see our charting library, which we are developing. And now I will give you a brief overview of it. In the center, under number 1, you see the main chart. And the main chart shows to you how the price of actions or bonds or something else was changing during a certain period of time. At the bottom, we have x-axis, and x-axis shows to us time labels, And on the right, we have y-axis, and this scale shows to us price labels, so we know for sure current price range. And finally, at the bottom, we have, in the left top corner, we have the legend component, and values inside the legend shows the information about current candle, which we are pointing at mouse, using mouse. And if I move the mouse, you see that the values inside the legend are changing. At first, the legend was implemented as controlled React component. However, when we were moving cursor very quickly, we have noticed some performance issues. We took a performance profile and we saw a lot of work caused by React. But how? We thought that React is pretty fast. And it turned out that on every mouse move event, the legend state is updated and re-rendered, and it sounds quite logic. At first, we have tried to use throttle function to reduce number of updates, but after that, it looked like that performance had degraded much more. And then I thought I need to update visual state somehow without React render. And at this point, uncontrolled components came to my mind. And now we can see the main reason why actually we need them. So performance is one of the main advantages of uncontrolled components. However, the performance which can get when I switch from controlled to uncontrolled components highly depends on factors listed on the screen. So to first, which are dependency on component render, on render duration and the amount of renders, are quite obvious because when we use uncontrolled components, we totally remove the render cycle. The last one, which is about the amount of components on the screen, is connected to React reconciliation algorithm. So when React state is updated, React has to iterate over the fiber tree starting from the root. And even if only one component was changed, React anyway has to do it. So this iteration causes some overhead. And now let's take a look at the results that we get using uncontrolled components. And on the screen you see two screenshots from Google Chrome DevTools performance profiler. Profiling was done during almost 7 seconds and in the same test case. I think it would be nice if I explain these results a bit. Idle time means that the application had done nothing. And it's good for application because that means we have some buffer of CPU time, which can be used later on some other tasks. And for mobile devices, that means less power consuming and longer battery life. So you will also see that the time which is not related to idle time, which is actually application work time, has been decreased by half. But wait a second, didn't we miss something here? Because in this profile, we observe the whole application, but actually we need to measure how this improvement boosted the legend component. So we have to take a look a bit closer to the legend profile. And if you take a look at the legend profile, you will see that time has changed a lot. I highlighted in red the total time spent on updating state, and it has been reduced by 11 times. And the total working time, which is highlighted in orange, has changed by 10 times. I think these results are very good for performance. It might be hard to believe, but it's real. Now, I hope you see uncontrolled components in quite different way, maybe like this, but we have to understand why it works. Let's take a look at what React does when it updates the state. In general, React work on the updating state consists from 3 phases. It's render, reconciliation, and commit phase. In the render phase, React executes user code, which is written by you as a developer, and it typically plays inside the render function if you have class component, or inside the function itself if you have functional component. In reconciliation phase, React walks through the component tree, starting from the root, and compares component state. It's important to note that React walks through all the tree in reconciliation phase. And finally, in commit phase, React applies schedule visual updates to the DOM. It appends nodes, modifies nodes, and etc. I think everyone would agree that React is a well-optimized library. Its work is cheap, but still we have some overhead here. Summing up, I'd like to give you a few guidelines how to use uncontrolled components. Real-world React components are usually quite big and not straightforward. So I think it's meaningless trying to write the whole component in uncontrolled way. So, for example, if you have a label which shows to us current language in an application, it's fair enough to assume that the content on this in this language is changed very, very rarely. And it's good to write it using control components because we don't need so much performance here. And our example, you have another label which shows to you market price. And you know, market price can be changed dozens of times during 1 second. And for this case, it's better to use uncontrolled components to meet your performance requirements. So it's essential to know disadvantages of uncontrolled components and understand why you actually need them. Then they will be a perfect instrument in your hands. Thank you. Please feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you, George, for your presentation, for the information. And guys, while we're waiting for your questions in the chat, I have one for George. Look, you just explained about this React components, and why can't we just use web components for this case? I think like in general, if you really need the good performance and speed, it's just much simpler to use vanilla.js, no?
Of course, there are several ways to solve this problem. Firstly, dxCharts is a library for developers, and we need to provide a way to customize our components. And for this purpose, we use styled components. And as far as I know, it's not really possible to customize web components using styled components. And even in general, external styling for web components is tricky because we have this shadow DOM thing. And if we are talking about vanilla.js, then there is no quite big difference between this, vanilla.js and uncontrolled approach, because you still have to create a React ref and pass it to your function, which will implement the logic of your component, and it will modify the DOM. So it's, I think, only about separate logic, wise logic separation. I'm sorry. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And is there any difference, in terms of speed, if we would compare using React uncontrolled components and vanilla.js web components?
In general, if your whole application in vanilla.js, of course, it would work a bit faster. But here we have a case where we have 5 years of development on React stack, and we can't just use only vanilla.js here. Rewrite the whole application. Mm-hmm. And if you talk about performance, I think vanilla.js is definitely faster than uncontrolled components, but I think there will be no big difference.
Is it a good idea to replace styles component to CSS or native CSS to get performance better?
It's a tricky question because here I didn't count CSS performance, and I think native CSS is faster because anyway styled components does some extra work. So yes, I think native CSS is faster than styled components.
Yeah, so thank you very much, George, for your answers for the presentation. Let's